All right. Actually, I've been told that we should get the ball rolling. So, everyone, welcome to the panel on deepfakes, disinformation, and democracy, protecting democratic resilience. I'm Regine Cabato from the Philippines. I'll be your moderator for today. And let me call up our panelists to come over on stage. Panelists. All right. In today's digital age, information manipulation poses a serious threat to democracy. Deepfakes, AI-generated media, and coordinated disinformation campaigns can distort public perception, weaken trust in institutions, and even influence elections. These developments raise urgent questions about accountability, ethics, and reputation. This panel brings together voices from across Asia to examine how such technologies reshape the political landscape. We'll talk about deepfake creation and detection, the impact of disinformation on voter behavior, and how best to fight for the digital democracy against the algorithmic tide. In short, we'll be talking about democratic resilience in the digital age. Let me introduce to you guys our panelists for today. We have Professor Dion Go of the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information in Nanyang Technological University here in Singapore. He's also the Associate Dean for Graduate and Continuing Education at the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. His research is within the broad area of human information behavior, and he leads a number of funded projects in deepfake identification and education, AI literacy, well-being in extended reality environments, and games for mental health interventions. And then we have Syed Nazakat, an award-winning journalist turned founder and CEO of Data Leads, a New Delhi-based digital media and tech company promoting open data and democratization of information. He's also a board member of the Global Investigative Journalism Network and the New Humanitarian. Syed has conceptualized and implemented a series of major media and information training projects and programs on fact-checking, information literacy, and infodemic management. And then we have Cleve Arguelles, President and CEO of WR Numero Research, one of the Philippines' up-and-coming public opinion research firms, which has some 500 researchers dedicated to understanding the pulse of the nation and trends in Philippine politics. His work at the firm was also recognized at the 2024 Freedom of Information Awards. And Cleve is also an assistant professorial lecturer at the De La Salle University in Manila. Last but not least, we have Dr. Maria Monica Wiharja, a visiting fellow and co-coordinator of the Media, Technology and Society program at ISAIA's Yusof Ishak Institute. She's also an adjunct assistant professor at the National University of Singapore. With a PhD from Cornell, her research interests cover the digital economy, labor market, disinformation, and electoral propaganda. Everyone, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with you and to be hearing from you. First, let's get the ball rolling. Let's set the scene of the state of disinformation in our respective countries and across the region. I understand that Syed has a few slides to show, so maybe Syed can go first.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. I think it has been a fascinating day here since morning. And what really we are discussing is information pathways. How and what people are consuming and the impact it may have on their choices, including the political choices. And this is a really, you can say, a fundamental thing in any open society, that people having access to accurate and timely information. But the challenge which is coming with different tech interventions, the rise of social media, is the deepfake. So maybe quickly in 5-6 minutes, I will just couple of slides, essentially for the purpose of visualizing that how we can actually build frameworks, large-scale frameworks, to deal with as big as the world's biggest election and protect voters from a and misinformation. So something we did in India, which was amazing in a sense, given the scale of our democratic setup and the population we have and the numbers of voters we have. So I think just ahead of elections, there was a massive avalanche of mis and disinformation, deepfakes essentially, and we saw a good and bad side of this whole narrative. The good side was the political parties used AI-generated tools to create translation. Like you must have seen, the Prime Minister Modi was one of the first in terms of adopting technology to reach more voters. So his Hindi speeches can be translated in Tamil or other languages. Amazing. That was great use of technology. But the same technology was also misused very badly, like across the country. And what was the triggering, discussion in the country was when 4 Bollywood actresses were targeted with a deepfake, which was a nude images of theirs circulated. And then the Prime Minister spoke about it. He said, no, we need to raise and we need to take action. And our challenge as a media company was, data leads, how can we bring newsrooms, technologists, and journalists together, right? Newsrooms are amazing. They provide information, they collect information, they disseminate. But the limitation comes when it comes to dealing with technology. So we thought, okay, what if we bring technologists, AI scientists, and newsrooms together? And can we be able to deal with these 3 challenges? Number 1, aid early detection of election-related mis and disinformation, amplify the good information, and then eventually enhance the skills of people who are dealing in this game. So what we did, and what you see on a screen, that was essentially why I was keen to show a couple of slides here, was how things can really dramatically change when different stakeholders work together. On the left side, you see the fact checkers producing fact-checking content, but because their reach was limited, but when they came together, we created a national hub of fact checks, where everything which was fact-checked was actually collected and stored on a hub. And the access to that hub was given to a large newsrooms who were reaching millions of people every day. So through this process, we will reach 100 to 100 million people in a single day during a crucial national election. And it protected millions of voters from mis and disinformation. And you can see the huge 300 journalists across the country work together under this collaboration from more than 50 newsrooms. And almost 10 languages were covered because India is a vast country. We speak so many different languages. And almost 67 newsrooms got understanding skills to establish their own fact-checking units during the election coverage. And what we also saw in this process was the deepfake is also changing. The whole technology is evolving. And our biggest challenge was most of these AI-driven technologies to counter deepfake were actually built in Europe and America, and they don't really work on Indian languages and dialects, actually. Same in other countries, if you look at that way. So our challenge was, how do we deal with this? And we collaborated with a center in India, which is the IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology in Jodhpur, and they created a tool called Itisar. It was an Indian, built tool for Indian elections, and we collaborated with them, and they made access of that tool free of cost to all the newsrooms in the country. So there's a huge opportunity for journalists or freedom media companies to work with the domain experts, technologists, AI scientists, to counter what we are seeing, the rise of deepfakes. And then across the country, we engaged with different newsrooms. We had discussions, public policy conversations and all. And now more recently, just 2 weeks ago, the government of India has actually given us a mandate along with 2 major IITs, the IIT Madras and IIT Jodhpur, which are 2 leading engineering colleges in India. And we're building a tool in next 2 years, which will be used to detect deepfakes at scale and use that at a different level. And the last, my thought is now, as we are going through this process and a lot of learning in the last 1 year, we also covered elections in Bangladesh, elections in Sri Lanka, elections in Thailand. So we have got a sense of what kind of deepfake content can circulate ahead of elections. So through Asian Dispatch, which is our flagship newsroom, we will be building a course for Asian newsrooms, how to build capacity, how to improve your game in terms of learning technology, learning AI, so that we can protect our readers, our viewers from the disinformation. So maybe during the discussion, I will pick up a couple of those things. But yeah, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you so much, Syed. Lots of interesting stuff we can circle back to later. That's the situation in India. Speaking of deepfakes, Professor Dion, how has deepfake technology advanced? Could you give us a bit of a situationer?
Yes, thank you, Regine. I think the challenge of deepfake technology is that it's constantly improving. And it's becoming very difficult to distinguish real from falsehood. And my research suggests also that it's not only humans struggle with it, but AI detection models also struggle with it. So I can offer 3 reasons why we are facing this challenge. I think first of all, we have lots of money being poured into AI research. You think about billions of dollars in terms of government research, universities, and corporations. And deepfake technology has actually improved alongside these AI advancements because fundamentally they're the same technology. When we talk about AI, we often talk about artificial neural networks, and deepfakes are also created using artificial neural networks. So it's not surprising that the videos that are being produced are becoming more and more challenging to distinguish. If you think about when deepfakes first appeared, this concept of deepfakes appeared about 10 years ago. The videos produced were pretty crude, they were easily identifiable as fake, and the hardware and software requirements were immense. You can't just create it on your own desktop computer. But if you fast forward to today, about 10 years later, hardware and software requirements are now pretty loose, and you can even create deepfakes using your mobile phones. So the technology is pretty widespread, and it's open to the public. You and me, we can all create deepfakes, whereas many years ago, you needed either IT expertise or some video production capabilities. So that's one reason, because of the amount of money poured into research. The second reason why deepfakes continue to confound people in terms of disinformation is that there's immense interest in the online community in terms of creating tools to produce deepfakes. So these communities produce open source tools. So the software code for creating these deepfakes are available to all. And if you have these tools that are promising or popular, then people begin to use these tools. They take the software code, they modify it, make improvements to it. And over time, these tools become more and more powerful and user-friendly. And I think the third reason why deepfake disinformation is proliferating, is challenging, is because of the amount of data that's available out there to create deepfakes, thanks to social media and our culture, our mindset of sharing. So basically, to create deepfakes, you need to have images, video, audio of your target, so that you can superimpose your target onto a video. And so if you have more of these audio-visual files available, then it becomes easier to create a realistic deepfake, so to speak, right? And thanks to social media, we post our own photos, videos, our speeches online. So all this data becomes available. So it's becoming increasingly easier to create very realistic deepfakes, right? So I think these are the challenges. They're not only technical, but they're also socio-technical. So it's really depends on you and me, corporations, society. There are various forces working together to make deepfake disinformation pretty challenging to overcome.
All right. Cleve, could you tell us a bit about the deepfake and generally the disinformation situation in the Philippines, maybe?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining our panel. And thank you, Syed, for showing why our large-scale problem also requires large-scale response, right, in the work that you are doing. If you ask Filipinos, they will tell you that disinformation is a big problem, even for ordinary Filipinos. In a national survey that we did at WR Numero, we find that as many as 80% of Filipinos say that they encounter fake news or other similar disinformative contents in their everyday use of social media platforms. So there is a more than majority awareness, but also a high level of concern regarding these problems. But I think that's not surprising, because what we see is that disinformation in the Philippines has now matured from a peripheral or alternative tactic into a full-fledged industry. We now have what can be called a proper market of covert influence operations, and it's quite a developed market. If you compare it in the early Duterte years, in 2016, for example, this information then can be characterized as centralized troll operations, right? There are command centers producing propaganda, often crude but effective, driven by personality-based politics and grievance mobilization. These are what, sometimes would be rated as troll farms. By the 2022 and the most recent 2025 election cycles, what emerged instead was now being described as a sort of like a marketplace. These are no longer just peripheral or individualized kind of like alternative troll armies, but what we see is a commercialized ecosystem or networks of influencers, PR strategies, content creators, and micro-contractors hired episodically on a project basis, shifting loyalties based on fees and political tides. It's a really thriving industry, and it's probably what's keeping the Philippine economy afloat now, aside from the remittances that we get from overseas Filipinos. And because of this scale of operation, not a single platform is safe from disinformation campaigns. Political operations can be observed across different platforms, whether that's TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, but even smaller platforms like X or Twitter and even Reddit, we already are observing disinformation campaigns. And what's new is that many of these disinformative campaigns are not overtly or explicitly political. Most are framed in such a way that they can be considered as lifestyle, as entertainment, or ordinary opinion. But they seed partisan messages. They seed disinformative campaigns. The system is so sophisticated precisely because it hides behind the aesthetics of authenticity, dance videos, couple vlogs, humor, and the disinformation is embedded in this emotional or affective storytelling. By 2025, this ecosystem is now powered even more, or has begun integrating artificial intelligence and synthetic media, creating this new phase in which this disinformation is even more automated, right? Prof. Dion has talked about deepfake, right? So we've also seen that in the Philippines, deepfake videos. So for example, there was a fake clip of a student passionately defending the vice president amidst an impeachment, a possibility of impeachment trial. It circulated widely, and it was viewed over 7 million times before it was taken down, and it was even mentioned or used by a politician as a way to say that the impeachment trial doesn't really have national support. So I think what makes this moment kind of like even more worrying with the entry of AI is that AI technology like deepfake, for example, it just made the cost of disinformation or content manipulation even cheaper, in the speed of this information near infinite. Just so cheap, and it's just so fast to produce. And I think that this combination erodes the ability of many of our institutions, and of course not without trying, right? From media to our electoral commission, to even verify, mediate, or correct information in time. And I end by saying that, of course, because I come from a political science background, that the deeper concern here is that the mainstreaming of a disinformation industry in the Philippines really meets the structural ongoing problems of Philippine politics. We have weak institutions, we face democratic erosion, and this really low regulatory capacity, which has allowed this very big, dynamic, and profitable market for disinformation to thrive so far. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cleve. What's your read, Monica? And maybe you could tell us a bit as well about the economic and policy implications of all of this.
Yep. First of all, good afternoon, both speakers, moderator, and audience here. So I like to touch upon maybe kind of like summarizing what the previous speakers have been saying, right? I think what we're trying to do now here is sort of like unbundling what I would call the unholy trinity between government, platforms, and society, right? And how, you know, each of us has interest in actually reinforcing the current trend, right? I mean, me myself is sort of like guilty in terms of like contributing to the economy of platforms by scrolling and clicking for engagements, right? So I think, yeah, we need to understand better this, like, and unbundle this what I would call like the unholy trinity, right? Recent study shows that actually users enjoy a bit of disinformation and misinformation. We kind of like it, right? We click on it, we read the news. Sometimes we share, you know, either for jokes or, you know, because we simply don't know that it's actually a disinformation or misinformation. And of course, platform with its business model of engagement and clicking and you know, using our interaction data for their predictive analysis and to target people, right? They make a lot of money from our engagement and from, of course, from digital marketing, digital advertising, right? And government also, you know, use it, you know, to their own advantage to control dissenters, not only to protect citizens, and also, you know, during elections for political gains, right? So, so we need to understand these models better. And if no one has actually interest to break the cycle, then we're just going to continue to see this cycle, this trend going forward, right? And I just would like to touch upon some of the things that could be threatening our democracy and society going forward. Actually, it's not the disinformation itself that is threatening, except for, of course, like, you know, some certain things like the production of child pornography. Like, even though it's, you know, it's not distributed, but it's still not legal, right? But the rest, I mean, a lot of like disinformation in terms of production is not like illegal until it's spread, right? And the lies themselves are not dangerous, but how they erode trust on truthful information, on our trust on institutions, government, and relations, right? I think, you know, there will be more studies coming out in terms of what that means to the increasing rise of protests that we've been seeing in recent months, right? From Nepal, Madagascar, Peru, Indonesia, and some other protests around the world. And the second thing, besides erosion of trust, is our loss of agency. We have no control in terms of what we read, in terms of what we watch, right? Because it's all fed into us, right? Using this hyper-personalized targeting. And the danger of that is that each of us has our own sense of reality of the world, because we are being fed on different information. There's no shared reality, right? Because the news that is being fed to us depends on our preference, depends of our behaviors, or what they see as like will be most interesting to each individual. And then the third thing is, of course, mental well-being, doom scrolling, right? Before the rise of social media, when we read news, we move on to other things in our life, right? We read newspapers and then we move on to our work or talking to our family members. But now we keep on scrolling.
Yes.
And then the third one, in terms of the dangers or the consequences, is how it changes our interpersonal behaviors and quality of our relationship. Now there's a concern among younger generation that they may be forgetting how to talk to human beings because they've been talking to Gen AI, they've been talking to Series, ChatGPT, right? And can they make decision again because they've been given answers whenever they ask? It's not like search engine where we are given some options and we make some deliberation in terms of how we want to respond. Now they are given answer or what the answer is, right? With Gen AI. Interestingly, there's a study that is published by Harvard Business Review that shows that in 2025, at the top of the Gen AI usage right now, top 3, is therapy and companionship, organized life, and find life purpose. It's no longer to generate ideas, specific search, or editing text. They're looking for purpose of life using, ChatGPT and how to organize their life and how to, find companionship. So what we have right now is that the notion of truth is getting shaky. So as I already mentioned earlier, like we have our own notion of truth, and we no longer share that one reality of truth, and that impacts the society and democracy and other things in our life.
Okay, that situation having been laid out, right? What interventions can be done or can be made to strengthen democratic resilience, first in the technical sense, but also second in the political realm? Let's try to maybe keep our answers a bit curt so that we can fit as much discussion as possible in the next 20 to 25 minutes. Shall we go the other way around? Dr. Wiharja, you can go first.
Sure. I think we need all possible layers of intervention. I think the first layers is regulations. And by regulations, I mean first, hard law, right? State regulations. And the second one is coordination among governments in the world. We need some kind of agreement, or maybe not agreement because that's hard to reach like across governments in the world, right? But some kind of like a way to coordinate how we regulate this at the global level, and also voluntary or soft law among platforms, right? Then the other layers is education. Education, especially among the most vulnerable groups of our society, from older people, but interestingly, for example, like even for Singapore citizens, right, is one of the most advanced countries in the world, but in a way, it's also like gullible digitally because financial scam is rife here in Singapore, right? So because they're so used to safety and security in the physical sense, so they become kind of like quote unquote gullible in the digital sense, right? And of course, like children. I think and with this, we need more diverse stakeholders or people who give inputs to how technology is advancing, right? It should not be only, so I would call this like democratizations of governance. It should not be only platforms, a few platforms or a few governments that are regulating how technology is developing. We need to find a way how also the society, civil society users can find ways to give inputs in terms of what they want and what they don't want in terms of how technologies is developing. I really like this Edelman Trust Barometer Index on digital technologies because the survey shows, what kind of technologies and what kind of digital platforms that they trust and don't trust, right? So in the way that give the society to voice their views in terms of the kind of technologies that they want and they don't want.
Cleve?
There are many, like on the technical side, there are many encouraging signs of innovation in addressing disinformation. But I think for me, that's only half of the story, or very partial account of how we should respond. I think on a deeper end, the problem is that really societies like the Philippines and others in similar situation, that we really have surrendered the power of democratic control over our infrastructures of communication. And I think that we must take this back. So I don't think this is a question of a technical lag that we have to catch up, but more than that, a shift in a paradigm that public authority must reclaim control, if not a say, over infrastructure that significantly shapes our attention, who gets to persuade us, what information gets to us. In the surveys that we do in the Philippines, surveys after surveys will tell us that what Filipinos use most of the time versus the media platforms that they trust the most are two different things, right? So they will say in surveys that I use Facebook, on a daily basis, but I trust Facebook or the information I get from Facebook the least. It may appear somewhat contradictory, but I think that part of the reason why this is the situation is that because people know that they don't have control and they don't have say on what happens on Facebook. So my point here is that to strengthen democratic resilience, or to make us more democratically resilient, but specifically to make our communication infrastructures democratically resilient, then democratic control must return. And this means that it's not just about regulating content. That's part of the story, but more importantly, other components of what I say is democratic control. How information is monetized, who gets paid and for what reason, how platforms are taxed, for example, how campaign data, how data in general is stored, and who owns and who gets a say in how the algorithms are used and deployed. And I end by saying that I think what we're learning is that, and this is not only for the Philippines but other societies as well, that while this information is powered by new technologies, the underlying system are quite old, right? It's elitist politics, it's partisan politics, right? It's anti-democratic politics, and it has always been our response that more democracy is a cure to these kinds of problems. Thank you.
In short, that people should have the right to opt out, right? Which we don't have in today's society. Syed, what do you think?
No, I think one or two things actually. One, I think let's appreciate the fact that for the first time in the human history, we have more information than we can consume. Like we grew up just 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, looking for a newspaper to see what has happened yesterday somewhere in the world. Today, that thing is completely gone. So there's an information explosion. Even if you don't like to watch something, there's a push button, which is making us extremely vulnerable. So it's based on our habits, yes. If I watch something, I get fed up more similar content. But even if I don't want to watch something, I will still get content on my feed. That's what it's making extremely difficult for us. I think that is one. Second, I do not think that there's enough visibility transparency, how data is collected, how it is stored, who collects it, what is happening with this data. There's absolutely like a bleak world. People really do not even know how tech platforms work, do not know what happened to their data. Is it data used to decide their future, to decide what they watch, decide what they want to buy, all of that. Actually, there's a very little transparency when it comes to deepfake technology, AI-driven technology. And there's a very little discussion about what is called participatory AI. Like, you're designing for people, but how are you designing for people without actually consulting kind of a framework? Like, it's designing with the people for the people. I think that, because when you do not have that visibility, what is being designed, you end up becoming like a product, or something is being sold to you at the end of the day. So I think we need a larger discussion about transparency first, so that we can appreciate what's happening, right? And then the regulations, then the other frameworks and all. And I think this is going to be a much bigger challenge in Asia, because most of these tech platforms are based either in Europe and America. Now, because there's a pressure on some of them, and you can see data centers now getting built in this part of the world. But I think this challenge will also shift dramatically given the way things are happening in China, given the way things are happening in India. You're seeing a lot of discussion on AI in this part of the world. In India, in fact, is hosting the next global summit next year, in early next year, which will again build a lot of discussion in this part of the world. How should the global south engage with the technology and also the deepfake technology?
Dion?
Sure. All right, so here I'm here to talk about technology, but I want to say that technology is not the solution to building democratic resilience, because technology, in particular AI, has its limitations. So let's say in the context of deepfakes, right, and you want to build deepfake detection models to automatically identify whether a video is real or fake. In essence, if you think about it, you are fighting fire with hot fire, because you're using artificial neural networks to create deepfakes, but you're also using artificial neural networks to try to identify whether a video is real or fake. So just a very quick background. When we talk about AI detection models or deepfake detection models, basically what you need to do is you need to have an artificial neural network, and then you need to feed it with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of videos. Some are marked as real, some are marked as deepfake. And then the artificial neural network will try to determine patterns, right? The types of cues that signify whether a video is real or fake. So that's the quick background. And why is it fallible? I just want to refer to what Syed said just now in this slide. We're talking about deepfake detection in the Indian context. Well, basically, AI detection or deepfake detection is as good as the data that you give it, right? So if you give it biased data, or if you give it insufficient data, then it won't be able to sufficiently detect whether a video is real or fake or not. So let's say, for example, you train your AI model on Caucasian videos, right? Real Caucasian videos, fake Caucasian videos. So the AI detection model is good at detecting whether the video is real or fake, but with Caucasian faces. Now, if you apply this to India or in a Chinese context or any other Asian context, it would not perform as well, because we have different maybe facial structures, skin tones, so on and so forth. So that's the biasness. And then in terms of sufficiency of data, many current deepfake detectors are trained on facial features. But we know that for video, deepfake video, it's not only facial features, it's audio as well, right? So if you train your model on detecting faces, what happens if the deepfake has very good visual appearances, but maybe the audio is suspect? Then the model will still not be able to detect whether the video is real or fake. And then another reason why we can't rely on technology alone is because there is an arms race, right? On one side, you have the deepfake creators that want to create technology that make videos as realistic as possible. But on the other hand, you have the deepfake detectors that want to be able to identify whether deepfakes are real or fake as accurately or not. So you can see that once the detectors are able to detect whether a video is real or fake, then the deepfake creators will try to up the ante, right? Improve that technology so they produce better quality videos, and then the detectors will have to catch up. So it's basically a very, it's like an infinite process, so to speak. And in my research, what I found was that even using the state of the art AI or deepfake detectors, they can only identify about 65% of new videos that have been downloaded from the web. So which means that nearly 35% of videos can't really be identified as real or deepfake. So I also like to refer back to what Dr. Maria said. You can't rely on technology. You need to rely on multiple stakeholders, right? You have governments, you have corporations and individuals, and all these need to work together to address this kind of disinformation problem. Okay, thank you.
I have a quick follow-up to that question, and then I'll ask another question for any takers on the panel. I'm wondering if it's as simple as well as maybe mandating AI companies, if that's possible, to watermark or to kind of enter some sort of code to make these deepfakes identifiable to a wider public, maybe not necessarily on the actual visual itself. So that's one question that I'm curious about. Another, for any other takers in the panel, is regulation, you think, not as effective as just educating the public about it? Or is it an either or? Should we give attention to both at the same time? Maybe you can go first, Jan.
Sure. Okay, so I'll talk about the regulation and education. Yeah, so you need both. Right, you have regulation on one side, but people still consume social media, right? They consume it, and even though the law say, you can't have, let's say you have a very stringent law, you don't allow disinformation and all that, but in real life, things still slip through. So it's up to the consumers also to acquire media literacy skills to be able to identify whether videos are real or fake. So I think really it's multiple parties are involved. You need governments to have the laws. You need corporations to have their trust and safety teams, to identify and remove deepfakes. And then you need individuals who are responsible for themselves to be able to equip themselves with media literacy skills.
I think regulations does really work. Look at the safe harbor policy. So safe harbor policy says, if you're a tech company and you're making money from this market, you need to have a presence in this market. If something goes wrong, you need to have a mechanism to remove that content in 24 hours. Like you need to let people know, everyone know, if they see something which is harmful, what is the way a common person can approach a tech platform? And if you don't follow them, then you need to close your office and leave the country. Right, as simple as it is. And it has worked really well. It has worked well in a sense that the tech companies are investing in new markets, which they are trying to capture. Mm-hmm. So they are making sure they understand, okay, this is the compliance officer, this is the local person in charge, this is the email address in case you see something harmful. Because see, what's happening is also the challenge to societies is a life and death situation. A deepfake video in India led to a mob lynching. More than 40 people died in that. Before people can figure out it was a fake video, 40 people were already killed actually. So who takes responsibility for that? And look at the elections. When there's a deliberate attempt to manipulate your election process, your democracy is at the stake. So who is responsible for it? So certainly I completely agree, there needs to be a framework which will set the rules of game, and these rules of game will take care of ecosystem. So it's not like a one company setting up the rule and then saying, okay, it's a free world and free speech and we can't touch it that way. I don't think that's going to work.
I completely agree with you, Syed. With the current status quo, there is just no incentive for social media platforms to take down content in the fastest and most efficient way as possible. Maybe in some countries it's because the governments or the politicians in charge have benefits from this disinformation staying up, but the rest of society suffers because it's not just political disinformation that is affected here. You mentioned the example of the mobs in the Philippines, human trafficking, child pedophilia, deep fakes, things like that is another example of content that cannot be taken down within a, or is ignored in a 24-hour window. But that's entrenched, I would say, with political disinformation because the technology behind it is similar. Any of the other two panelists can also take that question, but let me ask another one that we can maybe run through quickly, which is what lessons can we draw from regional experiences in tackling disinformation? Anyone want to go first? Go ahead, Cleve.
I'll just combine my response to the previous question and this one. I think your question, Regine, that whether watermarking AI, mandating AI companies to watermark their content, alone on its own, it will not be as helpful, right? But I think in a context, as Sayed was saying, in a context that it exists in a framework of, as I've said, regulation or democratic control of communication infrastructure, then it might work, right? Because one of the easiest, because there is an existing disinformation network, easily, if, for example, it's up to the companies to declare or to use watermark in AI-generated content, these content creators, these informative actors can easily just use other AI technology that's underground or kind of like coming from foreign countries that do not necessarily want to abide by those kinds of norms and regulations, right? So it's very easy to just get content from those and still that would be spread. And I think that what we must also consider here is that when we say that there is a need for a framework, there is a need for democratic control of these kinds of infrastructure, or even if you say there's need to be a strong regulation, that I think that what is not being talked about is that this will be hard to set up, that this will be a painfully slow process for countries, especially in the global majority, to kind of like set up. It's like, for example, if you want your electoral commissions to be able to kind of like understand the algorithm of social media, really be able to see where data is stored, how data is used during elections, then they will also need to build an army of experts and the expertise to be able to counter. And so I think the sooner that we realize that we need that kind of power and expertise as well, then the sooner that we will be able to make a dent in these kinds of problems. But again, it will be slow. It will be a painful rebuilding of our capacity to exercise democratic control over these kinds of private infrastructure, such as, for example, this communication, these platforms or social media platforms. And the last thing I want to say in your question that there is I think there's a reflex to treat this issue as an informational issue, hence the response being that we need a lot more education and civic campaigns. And of course that is true, but also in another sense that we cannot reduce this issue as an informational problem, right? I think that at the end of the day, it's more of a political, if not a social political problem. It's a question of the distribution of power. And currently, as you have noted, actors in the Philippines find it so difficult to ask Meta to take down a content. But this is not the case for other places. And this speaks to power relationship, right? And whether they feel they're accountable to the public in the Philippines, whereas I've already encountered a study that it's easier because, of course, EU, for example, in that context has more regulation, right, and in other jurisdictions, right? So this is not an informational issue alone, but a deeply political one, and the response must also be partly political and technological, as the other panelists has discussed.
Monica?
Yep. Just a quick addition to what other speakers have already said in terms of responding to your question about watermarking AI-generated contents. I just heard this morning from a webinar that I moderated this morning that actually a study shows that 50% of the content right now on social media are like AI-generated or that have been like spread through like bots, right? And we can imagine like as AI technology is becoming more sophisticated, there are more AI-generated contents than non-AI generated contents, right? That comes from our heart. So how are you gonna manage that, right? It's a lot, and you can imagine like I will have to start making disclaimer in any of my talk that actually I use some kind of like AI, right? I mean, I don't use Gen AI to write my speech today, but my search engine may be using AI, right? So imagine like each of us has to make that disclaimer, right? So I think that's going to be hard to do that. So that's a challenge going forward because as a previous speaker already mentioned, we have this government, big tech, and society kind of like this unholy trinity that I already talked about, right? Now, in terms of lessons from the region, I just would like to quickly make or exemplify, three challenges going forward, drawing on Indonesia's experience. One is from the recent election, 2024 president elections, right? So what we're seeing is, is less about blatant use of identity politics, hate speech, slander, or outright disinformation, but more sophisticated and subtle information and psychological manipulation, such as the use of AI-generated cartoon images, to create political images, generate satire, increase political engagement and communication, including by creating a sense of closeness and shared connection, right? So it's not about disinformation or outright disinformation. Even exposure to deepfakes, according to nationally representative survey that my institute conducted, right, is actually low. Exposure and belief in deepfakes are low, but there's a lot of like nuances. For example, there's selective belief and selective exposure. So who actually believe and don't believe certain disinformation that reflects like pre-existing biases such as partisanship and so it's more complex and it's more nuanced than just outright disinformation that can easily be banned by defamation laws and things like that, right? The second thing that I would like to reflect on is the recent case in Indonesia is called the Bajorka case. So basically large-scale data leakage of how many millions of Indonesians' identity card informations and phone numbers were leaked, right? Including other cases like the most recent one were personal informations of the police, of all personnel from the police institutions. But what is interesting here is that actually some studies now are showing that actually this kind of leakage kind of like gets public support instead of like people condemning it. Actually, these hackers are seen as like Robin Hood because they also leak, some of the personal information of government or institutions that recently have got, a lot of public discontent, right? So there's like, why don't we just leak, all this data, right? So that's a concern in my view. And then the third one that I would like to mention is the recent Indonesian protests, right? And it's showing basically how disinformation can be used during this kind of chaotic times, to turn legitimate grievances into violent ends, right? So they're mixing demonstrators with rioters, they're mixing, student protests. I mean, students who genuinely try to go on the street, to express their grievances, right, about the current situation in Indonesia, and and the interventions that makes them look like they're like, writers that cause, some kind of like violence, right? So I just would like to reflect on these 3 previous events in Indonesia.
All right. Thank you to all the panelists. So we will be taking some questions now from the audience. Okay, we have like 3 hands up. Let's go with, 3 to 4 hands up. Everyone could ask the questions all at once, and then due to lack of time, do you guys have a mic? And then we'll let the panelists take it from there. Yes.
Hi, my name is Amira from Indonesia. So my question is related to regulating deepfakes and disinformation. And I want to point out how tricky this is by reflecting how we have approached hate speech and defamation, in which that the regulating is not in the literal words said, but rather than the harm that it's caused. And it becomes really, really tricky, because then it's not that you need to prove that these are forbidden words, but rather that those words are harmful. And reflecting to Indonesia's implementation of law in informatics for defamation in social media, we have seen how much these laws are actually used to criminalize citizens who criticize the state, or for citizens who complain about services from big corporates. And so this becomes a challenge as well. How do we regulate when the citizens do not trust the state in regulating? Thank you.
Okay, good question. Next.
Okay, my name is Evan. I'm from Indonesia. So quick, today, deepfake and fake news are spreading fast and making people lose trust in media, government, and democracy. Many countries in Asia and also in Indonesia still don't have strong laws or digital education to stop this problem. So I'm curious, learn from your country or your research, how can people keep their trust in democracy when so much false information is online? And what can government and digital platform do to protect democracy from these threats? Thank you.
Okay. There's 2 questions from the table behind, and then the table at the end.
Hello, I'm Fermar from the Philippines, Kasip Batch 11. The dangers of deepfakes and disinformation when it becomes comfortable to the voters could shape the reality of the population, which in turn becomes the voice of the democracy. And that's why we're trying to protect democracy, or able to attain democratic resilience through our government institutions, as well as its democratic processes and its values. So state regulation is very crucial in order to achieve democratic resilience. Now, my question is, how do you foresee in the future the dynamics between the user rights to access freedom of information in contrast to the government framework or state regulations in protecting democracy? Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Luisa Erispe. I'm a news reporter from the Philippines. My question is, as a journalist, our main goal is to inform and provide credible news to the public. However, from what we experience in the Philippines, due to the strong impact of social media today, some people prefer to believe the political ideologies or theories of social media influencers and AI-generated videos rather than the reports made by credible news writers. People somehow sees news from mainstream media as filtered, and they choose the most of the unvetted information they get from social media. We know that everyone is free to speak of their minds and to choose which information they should believe, but the question is, if this progress, how do you think will this impact a country politically, and what should we journalists do not to be overpowered by AI or by social media and prevent disinformation?
All right. And the last question?
Hi, I'm Marian Enriquez, a journalist from the Philippines. There are actually renewed calls in the 20th Congress to pass an anti-fake news and disinformation act, with bills filed both at the House of Representatives, even by the President's son, Sandro Marcos, and by the Senate President himself at the Senate. But similar measures were also filed during the 19th Congress, and never reached the committee discussion stage, so I don't know. It's unclear actually how far this will go now. But in countries like Singapore, I understand that there's already the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act. And from your perspective, how important it is for countries like the Philippines to have a law against disinformation? And can legislation generally stop the spread of false information, or does it risk simply driving it underground? And just to follow up, what key safeguards should Philippine lawmakers include to make such a law isn't used to silence critics or independent media? Thank you.
All right. This last question is also related to the first. How much of the law is weaponized by the state, and what can we do about it with people's trust? So maybe let's go with those two questions first. Any takers from the panel?
Okay, that's a lot of Philippine questions. So let me try my best. So I think one of the kind of like consistent and consistent themes among those different questions is the question on, can we trust the state? So if we assume and we concede that regulation is needed, can we trust the state to regulate, right? I think that's also the question coming from the lady from Indonesia, right? When it has a history of going against its own citizens. And I think that the Philippines, Indonesia, other democracies in Asia embodies this problem, right? That the state itself is sometimes compromised, if not fully compromised, either distrusted by citizens or complicit in also their own version of influence operation. And because of that, we see more often than not that regulation is just synonymous to state repression. But the paradox or the challenge is that if we leave it unregulated, then this information is also allowed to flourish unchecked. I think my position here is that the question then is not whether we should regulate, but who gets to regulate and through what kinds of form we do this particular regulation. And if you notice, my preferred term is democratic control over state regulation, and that is deliberate on my end because what I want to emphasize is that state regulation or any form of regulation of the communication infrastructure doesn't have to be monopolized by state actors. Here, what I look at is, what I'm saying is that we must also abandon that very traditional, old, archaic form of state regulation, but also try to democratize regulation itself in attempting to exercise democratic control over communication infrastructure. There are some I think some of the panelists here talk about it already, but we can imagine a multi-stakeholder system, right? Wherein the power to exercise control is shared by different state and non-state actors. So there will be, people from civil society, people from the media, but also people from the state, right? Elected politicians. So my proposal here is that more of a kind of like a horizontally connected groups of people regulating this communication infrastructure rather than your top-down vertical regulation. And hopefully that addresses some of our concerns that regulation will just end up as state repression. But ultimately, it will not be a guarantee if we're looking for safeguards, because as I've said, this is a political issue as much as it is informational, and therefore political reforms, political changes, right? It's the quality of our political systems that will also definitely significantly shape the outcomes and the whether this kinds of system will make our democracy resilient. And just quickly on that question on what media, our friends and colleagues in the media should do, I think that there is an understanding among our colleagues in the media, among journalists, that they must adapt to the new world of communication, right? The ground has shifted and there is necessarily a need to adapt. But I think, and this is just a very quick remark because I do not pretend to know journalism and news production, is that But I think that journalists also must not behave as partisan actors, right? And or replace opposition actors in societies, especially in polarized societies. I think in polarized societies, sometimes there is a demand for our journalists not only to verify news, not only to fact check, not only to report the truth, but also to behave somewhat as opposition politicians, as opposition parties. And I think this is not something that must be encouraged. I think that journalists hopefully can find a way to adapt to the new ways of communication in our society without losing sight of its original and foundational mission. I think it must stick to its mission, that its role is to report the news. And even the fact-checking requirement, even the fact-checking requirement now, I think it's just, it's also taking too much time and resources from our newsroom, right?
Yeah.
When originally it should be reporting the
Okay,
news.
thank you, Cleve. Any other takers for any of the 5 questions?
I just like
Syed and
see,
then
there's a good news for journalists. As long as human beings are there, they need information. Now it's a question of how do you deliver this information? So we are in a good space, provided we improve our game. Second, the key will be when there's so much information available, millions of posts all the time going up and everything, the key skill which the journalists have to adopt and learn quickly, how do you reduce noise from the information? If we are good in that, we have a very good future. No blogger, no vlogger, no content creator, we actually create that space where the journalists actually, as a storyteller, will adopt and do better actually. It's irrespective whether newspapers will remain there, radio will remain there, TV will remain there. The mediums can change, right? But the journalism will survive, provided we get the skills of helping us how to reduce noise from information. And very quick on another one of the things which we have seen through a couple of impact studies is that the education, investing in education, really pays back. It makes huge difference to people. In one of the work we did in India again, in which almost 60 million people benefited from an awareness campaign, which digital awareness and all. And after the whole exercise was over, we actually asked people through our impact study, are they able to identify good and bad information after they got this training and all? And overwhelmingly, people said yes. They're much better now able to understand what is confirmation bias, right? Why they see positive toxicity, for example, as a good thing for themselves. And they acknowledge they're vulnerable for it. Earlier, they will never acknowledge. Look at Singaporeans for that matter, 90%, 99% education level here, but they are most vulnerable to the cyber fraud. Like you will never expect Singaporeans falling for cyber fraud because they are very well educated and all. So naturally, but maybe critical thinking is lacking somewhere, and that education is also needed somewhere.
All right, Monica and then Dion, maybe for the last words. But I'll remind you guys of the other questions that were also asked on how to maintain public trust and how you deal with people who prefer to believe what they want to believe, and also another question on FOI. Yeah,
I guess I also would like to respond to some of the questions from our Indonesian audience, right? My answer should also sort of like respond to the questions on the Philippines. For me, I think in terms of regulating online content, it's not a matter of whether, it's a matter of how. So it's a non-starter to say that just because regulating online content can risk over-regulation in terms of controlling free speech and these kind of things, I think it's a non-starter. I mean, no matter what, state regulations to regulate online content is needed. So the government just has to walk the fine balance between regulating to protect or regulating to control, right? But as we've seen in recent protests, in some countries they call it the Gen Z protests, right? I think it's when government overregulate, right, online content, the society will react to that too, right? In a form of, for example, like Gen Z protests. So right now we're already seeing that actually, if a government is trying to control too much of online content or online information, that could backfire too for the government. Also, as already mentioned previously, yes, education and also channels to institutionalized or formal channels for the society to express their concern to the government. If these channels don't exist, if, for example, if society don't have these formalized or institutionalized channels to voice their concerns or give their inputs, then there will be more and more of these non-mainstream medias. People try to voice their concerns or give their inputs or views on social media platform rather than the formal channels to the government, right? And another factor is trust. So if you see that mainstream media is being regulated more, mainstream legacy media are being regulated more by the government, but if you don't have trust on the government, they will not be like consuming, this mainstream legacy media, right? But if you have trust, if the trust in government is high or institution is high, like in Singapore, right? Then they will still be consuming this mainstream legacy media, right? So trust in institutions and government also matters. And maybe the last one is that, I just want to also highlight the importance of investing in quality journalism, right? So those people who have the money then need to invest more in quality journalism.
Dion?
Okay, so I know time is short, so I'll keep this short as well. But I'd like to, coming from Singapore, I want to address this issue about why Singaporeans are so gullible, right? Even though we are technological advance and so on. I think a couple of speakers made that point, and I agree. I think because I work with senior citizens as well as Gen Zs in terms of misinformation, and I teach them, and I give talks and all that. So in Singapore, there's a lot of awareness about scams, deepfakes, and all that. You can see a lot of public service announcements. So people know about these things, but I think what's lacking is the media literacy. They know that, okay, scams are out there, but they do not know how to identify. So when I conduct research with them, both Gen Zs and senior citizens, the ability to identify deepfakes, for example, it's just 50%, so just no better than chance. So they don't have that kind of media literacy skills. So that's one possible reason I can think of. And another reason is many people feel that it won't happen to me, right? I'm educated, I'm technologically savvy and all that. So there's no motivation to actually acquire skills. So I think this is where we if you take a psychological perspective, you need to give them the intrinsic motivation. Why is learning about why is acquiring media literacy skills important? Well, because you can avoid financial scams, you can avoid relationship scams, you won't be hurt, and so on. So I think identifying the fundamental reasons why people are not motivated to learn is another aspect that we should be tackling as well.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm not sure if we have time for the last question. I think not anymore. So everyone, I think we'll have to close the panel. Thank you so much to our panelists for today. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you.